Hi, Sally. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, hi, Ethan. I'm very happy to be with you, and I'm fine.
That's good to hear. I'm glad you've come on. It's great to meet you. And I've read your book, which we'll get into, Rock and Roll Nanny, about your life with some of rock and roll's most notorious bands, really. So we'll hear some stories from the book and everything. But I just want to talk about your early life and your childhood first. What was that like?
Yeah, well, I was born in 1949, just after the war, on a farm in Wiltshire. My father was a farmer in the middle of nowhere, and we lived in a really old Tudor house that was falling to pieces, but it was wonderful. It was the most wonderful place to be brought up around horses and cows and just the country life. It was fantastic. Um, But it's quite an interesting story. One of my grandfathers was quite famous. He invented the safety socket, MK plugs and switches, and the three-pronged procket, spot. What am I thinking of? Socket. He invented the third prong on the plug, safety prong. And so he invented the safety socket. And MK Electric was our sort of famous family thing. So that was interesting. And also because he made a lot of money, despite being taxed 92 pence in the pound, he was a multimillionaire. So he funded our education. And because a farmer doesn't make much, even then farmers didn't make much. And so we all had sort of private education, what public school, what the Americans would call private. And I went away to boarding school at the age of 7. And actually, I loved it. I really loved it. I discovered I was very independent and quite assertive, quite bossy. And then in the 60s, there weren't many careers for girls. You were supposed to get married, which I didn't want to do, or become a secretary or a nurse, and I was told, oh, girls don't go to university. Um, so I ended up training to be a Norland nanny, which is the nannies in the sort of brown uniforms with the brown bowler hats. It's the creme de la creme of nannies. And it's really because I was the eldest of four. I was really good with kids and I wanted to travel. And the way to travel was to be with these very rich families who could afford these very classy nannies. So I did do a secretarial course, so I'm good at my typing and shorthand. And then I trained at Norland, was nearly kicked out for wearing too much makeup and too short skirts. And it's a very difficult training. It's very strict. You have to pass all the exams, otherwise you're kicked out. So it's a sort of 3-year training, and you're boarding. It's like a boarding school. It's not like that now. It's based in Bath now. When I was in it, it was in the countryside in Hampshire, and but it's a daily school college. Actually, I think it's a university. They're called degrees now, and it's based in Bath, and they don't board like we did. Anyway, so I did my training and had a few jobs. Well, I had two. One was with a singer you wouldn't remember, I doubt, a woman called Georgia Brown. She was a
No,
jazz singer, and she was very famous in the story of oh God, my brain's gone blank. Anyway, a very famous film that she was in. And so I nannied for her for a while, but she was quite tricky and she wouldn't let me out. So I was stuck indoors on the top floor, the sort of servants' quarters, with a tiny baby, not being allowed to go out. So Norland rescued me and got me out. And I went to another lovely family who I'm still in touch with in Kensington Square in London. And I had two little boys. One was a baby, one was a toddler. I loved my boys. And then I wanted to go traveling. I got my degree, my diploma, we called it then. And I thought, right, after I'd done all that, said farewell to my lovely family and jumped in my little sports car and went off traveling around Europe and with a friend. And on the way back, we stopped off in Paris. By this time, I'd met a Frenchman. So I stopped off to stay with him. My friend came back to England. And while I was living with him, he was quite a famous film producer, Jean-Pierre Rassam. he was working with people like Jean-Luc Godard and Roman Polanski and people like that. And so I was living with him in Paris. And one day we went to a party, and there was Mick and Bianca Jagger. And Bianca was very pregnant. And somebody had told them I was a Norland nanny. So they both came to me and said, "Will you come and be our nanny?" And I said, "No, no, no, not interested. I'm happy with the boyfriend." Anyway, I ended up meeting up with them quite a lot. They would invite me over to their hotel for tea and things. And I remember one day we were having tea in the on the terrace of their penthouse suite. And Mick produced this letter from Norland, from my college. He'd written to them and he'd said, I used to have a Norland nanny when I was with my previous girlfriend, Marianne Faithfull, but now I'm married, my wife's expecting a baby, we'd like another Norland nanny. And the college had written back to him and said, we'd like to recommend a nurse called Sally Arnold, and we're trying to find her. And he said, look, it's fate. You've got to come and work for us. So that's how I got to know the Jaggers. And but I didn't want to work for them for a while. Bianca didn't know her birth dates. I mean, I was meeting them in probably August, September, and the baby didn't arrive until October. Anyway, I kept in touch with them, got fed up with the boyfriend, took the job with them. And that was it, got the traveling I wanted. So, yeah, that's how I started with them. First of all, we lived in a hotel. And in those days, there were no disposable nappies. It was all, I had to hang the nappies around the hotel room to dry them and boil the bottles. And I had this sort of metal contraption that I had to carry everywhere to boil the bottles. It's all very old fashioned.
Well, you lived with them, like you say, you lived in a hotel to start with, and then
Well, first of all, we lived in L'Hotel. It's called L'Hotel. It's the house where Oscar Wilde died. And it's a very famous hotel. It's lovely. And then we went to stay at an apartment of Nathalie Delon, the wife of Alain Delon, very famous film star, French film star. We stayed there for a while. And then we went down to the south of France to a chateau where the Rolling Stones had all gathered and were starting to record Exile on Main Street. So I met all the others and ended up at Nelcote, Keith's famous, infamous chateau, for a visit. And basically, I was just looking after the baby, and I was in my uniform. The picture of me there in the uniform is on the cover of my book. That's me in the uniform.
oh yeah, yeah.
My Norland uniform, yeah. And I was really happy. I loved the job. Mick and Bianca were fantastic. The baby was wonderful, very good little baby. This is Jade, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
Yes, yes. And then we moved to Los Angeles. Again, a month in a hotel, and it was the Beverly Wilshire Hotel on Rodeo Drive. And I had no pushchair, no pram. So if I wanted to go out for a walk, I had to carry her. And then they rented a house. And it was the most astonishing, bizarre house. Again, you're too young to know these names, but it had been built by the very famous William Randolph Hearst, who's depicted in Citizen Kane, the film.
The name rings a bell. I'm not sure why,
Yeah,
though, but yeah,
William
yeah.
Randolph Hearst was like Rupert Murdoch now. He
All
owned
right, yeah.
a whole newspaper. He was a newspaper magnate. And this house had been built by him for his mistress. And it was actually the most beautiful house, but sort of falling to pieces and ants everywhere. Oh, it was filthy, but it was fun and I didn't mind, you know. And so I was getting to know everybody and having a really good time. But slowly, slowly, things started to change and the baby was getting too fond of me because she was with me 24/7 and very rarely saw her parents. And I'd give her to her parents and she'd hold her arms out crying to me, you see. And at Norland, we'd always been taught if the baby gets too fond of you, it's time to move on. And there were a few other problems, but I don't really want to talk about them publicly. I sort of allude to them a bit in the book. So I ended up actually staying in LA for a while, staying with friends that I'd made. And that was lovely. And then I thought, well, I'd better get back to England and find a job. So I went back to England and I actually started doing PR for classical musicians. But PR didn't really exist in those days, and I wasn't getting paid anything. And then suddenly Mick Jagger's assistant phoned me one day, his driver, a chap called Alan. And he said, look, we're looking for somebody in the Stones office for the Who as well, in the touring office. And I said, but why me? I'm a nanny. And he said, well, because all the guys like you and all the wives trust you, which was really great that all the wives trusted me. So I was trusted, which is a really good feeling. Anyway, so I ended up in what was called 5-1 Productions, and it was the touring office for the Rolling Stones, the Who, Golden Earring, Marsha Hunt, the Herd. You know, this was in, what year was this? 1974, because Jade was born in 1971. So yeah, and so suddenly I ended up on the road with the Who, with the mad Keith Moon. Have you actually read my book?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've read about my first meeting with Keith Moon when he was inside a wardrobe.
Yeah.
I could hear this banging and banging and banging on this wardrobe, and suddenly he burst out, and there were sort of splinters flying everywhere. And somebody said to him, "Oh, this is Sally, our new secretary." And he went, "Oh, my dear, how nice to meet you." It was so sweet. He's
What
a
was he
wonderful,
like, Keith Moon, then?
wonderful. He was the most wonderful chap. And for some reason, even when he was drunk, he obeyed me. He would always obey me. I was quite bossy, you see. It's like nannying overgrown kids. It's really, that's
Well,
really what it
when you
is.
started tour managing, you say like you're at the airport, you've got all their passports, they're wandering off, and it sounded like when you go on a school trip and you're the teacher.
Exactly it. Exactly it. Yes, I had to hold on to their passports, their boarding passes, everything. One time I forgot to get Ronnie, was it Ronnie Wood's passport? And we were in Berlin. We got to the airport. He'd left it in the hotel. I mean, things like that happened all the time. So I had to be I had to be very organized. I had to be very systematic about things. I mean, this is why I didn't really get into the drugs heavily, because I always had to be able to pull myself together, to snap to, because the amount of times I would have the police knocking on my door or the hotel managers at 4 o'clock in the morning, come here, you've got to sort this out, you know. And this was literally people like Keith Moon throwing TVs out of hotel windows. It literally was.
Well,
And
also,
even,
oh
yes,
sorry,
go on.
oh
No,
no,
no, no, I was just going to say one story about Lynyrd Skynyrd. Leon, the bass player, even climbed out of a hotel window about 4 floors up to hide from the police. And I knew he was there.
we'll, we'll get on to Leonard Skinner too, but were
Yeah.
they like the most chaotic band for you?
Well, it's interesting because everybody thinks the Who would have been, but no, Skynyrd were by far the most chaotic. They were terribly difficult. But again, they would obey me. Again, it was Leon who would say to me, don't give me the evil eye, because I'd get really strict.
Just to go back a bit, when we mentioned you worked for Mick and Bianca Jagger, you weren't really well. I don't know if you are now, but you weren't really a fan of rock and roll music, really.
No, I
Um,
wasn't at all.
what was it like entering this circle and this bubble?
Yeah, that's interesting. It was an eye opener. I mean, if remember, I was a farmer's daughter. You know, I'd been brought up in the wilds of Wiltshire and went to the village school, you know, that kind of thing, surrounded by tractors and horses and cows. And suddenly being thrust into that was very interesting. And that's really why I wrote about it, because I think I was very privileged to be involved in the music industry at the very beginning of rock and roll's sort of descent into what it is now, you know, massive business. Then it was tiny. There was one trucking company, one lighting company, one sound company, and that was it. That, of course, now there's thousands. And so that's why also in my book, at the back of it, I've put a whole section on the beginnings of the technical side of rock and roll, because I think people are interested in that. Because, you know, what amps did they use and that kind of thing in the very early days. And actually, it's very sad because the chap who that was written about, Brian Croft, who was the sort of granddaddy of roadies, he just died about 3 weeks ago. And he was my hero, my mentor, my hero, and my dear friend. He was old. I mean, he was 86 or something. So, and he'd had a good life. But yes, it was a whole new world for me. But I just got on with the job, to tell you the truth. You know, I had a job to do, so I did it. And I knew I had to be efficient. I knew I had to be together, and I knew I had to set a good example, I suppose.
Is it only years after you stopped working in like the music business that you look back and thought like, not that you were well privileged, but that it was a bad experience? Like when you're living in it, it's different,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. Because when you're in it, it's just a job.
Yeah.
Now I look back and I think, my goodness, how did I manage to do all that? It was terribly hard work as well. I mean, and of course, also in those days, we didn't have the euro. Each country in Europe had a different currency and different taxes. So I was having to deal with francs in France, lira in Italy, and, you know, pesetas in Spain, and having to give all the crew their per diems, their daily money in local cash and keeping records of it. I didn't have to do that with the Stones and the Who. We would bring an accountant on the road. But with the other bands, because I also did the Stones, the Who, and then my main bands were Lynyrd Skynyrd, Peter Gabriel, and Mike Oldfield. So I had to do the accounts for all of those on the road as well. Yeah, it's really hard work.
Yeah, I was gonna say in the book you don't realise how much goes into a tour, do you? Till like you read your book.
So that's one of the reasons I did it, because I thought people would be interested.
Yeah.
And I hope they are. Yeah. And also, because I was the first female tour manager. Um, I mean, there probably were females in America doing it, but we weren't sort of officially called tour managers. We were just people helping. So I was sort of officially the first female tour manager in rock and roll.
Was that like did that benefit you, do you think, or hinder you being the first female?
Yeah. I mean, I know I had a good reputation. I was well respected in the industry. I remember one promoter once saying to me, "You're one of the best tour managers." So that was nice. And this was, and also, you see, when Mike Oldfield wanted to do his very first tour, he interviewed 4 tour managers, 3 men and me, because there were no other women. And I got it. And also, Peter Gabriel wanted a female tour manager, and there was only me. So, yeah, it did benefit me. Yeah. Because I got to work with some amazing people. Even though I didn't like rock and roll, I appreciated it. I understood, you know, the work that went into it, especially with people like Peter Gabriel. I mean, he's a genius, but he's also such a nice man.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of the nicest people ever. Yeah,
Well, just back to the Who. What was that first tour like then as tour manager?
mad. Luckily, I did have my boss with me. His name was Bill Kirbishley, and he was like, he became the manager. He still is the manager of the Who. And he taught me the ropes. And he would take me to meetings with the lawyers. So I learned all about contracts and everything like that. It's fascinating. He treated me, he really liked women in business. Some men do, which is great. I was always very lucky. I very rarely had any problems with men. They always seemed to like me and respect me. And I learned a lot. And then after the first tour with Bill and The Who, he sent me out on my own with them. So I was then the tour manager. And it really was just, it's like a glorified, sort of like a glorified secretary, but you're traveling on the road. you've just got to, yeah,
Are
tell
there
them
some
what to do.
stories that stick out to you from that first tour, or the second
Not
tour?
really, because they all sort of blend into one after a while, because I did so many.
Yeah.
And yeah, and they were all completely bonkers. I mean, day after day after day, there was a problem, you solved it. There's another problem, you solved it. You had to kind of be brave and make decisions based on the information you had at the time. It might not have been right, but it was all you could go on, and you knew there'd be another problem coming. So you had to get rid of that problem and be prepared for the next one. I mean, if it wasn't the boys being in prison, especially Keith Moon being arrested at an airport in Scotland, and me having to phone the solicitor in the middle of the night to get him out of prison, we had the best solicitors, of course, as you can imagine, the best of the best. And yeah, and if the hotels, for example, would give me a bill, for example, for when Lynyrd Skynyrd would wreck a corridor and they'd break the safety glass in the doors. I remember once it was a Holiday Inn. I think it was in Bristol. And they gave me a bill for broken glass. And of course, they tried to amp it up, the bill. So I just phoned a glazier, asked them how much was this safety glass, and challenged the hotel. Paid the proper. I'm not going to let my boys pay more than they should.
With like Keith Moon, when you mentioned he got arrested, was it hard, like getting them to the gig on the
Oh,
night?
very difficult, yes. But you see, that was always my whole raison d'etre. My whole purpose was to get them to the next gig. Come hell or high water. I just had to get them there. Yeah,
Was there any close shaves? I know you mentioned the Leonard Skinner one at the start of the book.
that was the most vivid one because I remember the audience was getting very antsy. And I remember thinking, oh my God, there's going to be a riot. And thank God Artemis turned up at the last minute. But the theatre manager and me, we were so worried, standing by the stage door. I knew he'd turn up eventually, but you see, again, it's this thing with treating them like children. When I would say to them, be on the bus by 11 a.m. or 12 midday, and if they're not there, I would leave. I would go. And the only way, or I would threaten I would go. And the only way to get their obedience is to fulfill the threat. And one day Artemis didn't turn up. So I left. Sorry, my voice is going. And I knew I think we were in Sheffield. And I knew he'd got enough money to get a bus or a taxi or a train. And I knew that it wasn't far, and I knew he could get a taxi. And he did. And he knew the address because I typed out the itinerary, and everybody had got a copy of the itinerary with the address of the venue and the phone number and everything.
You know, with all that detail you put in, after you worked with the Jaggers, you went traveling through Russia and Asia. Did that help you, like, with the tour management and knowing things are in different countries and stuff?
Yeah, I think so. It made me realize you have to be organized when you're traveling. You've got to kind of book ahead and, have your passport ready and it's just being organized. To me, it's just common sense. And I don't think a lot of people, not everybody's got it. So they need somebody like me. They're the creative brains. I'm the sort of dog's body brain. I'm the one doing the work. So they can go off and be creative. They don't need to worry about the niggly little things.
Well, on the back of your book, Pete Townsend says she's tough and well experienced at dealing with show business egos. How did you deal with these egos?
Just by being bossy, honestly. I keep repeating it, but that's all I can really remember. But you see, it's like I recently did an interview with the Stoned Roadie YouTube channel, and that's one of Lynyrd Skynyrd's roadies. Very good, dear friend of mine, known him since the 70s. And we were talking about this, and I said, but Craig, that I was bossy. And he said, yes, but we all knew you only did it because you cared for us and you loved us and you wanted us to do the best. So they all understood I was doing it for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't for me. It was all so they could do their thing. So I did my thing, they could do theirs. And I also, with the road crew, I had a motto, a happy crew is a happy tour. So I always made sure the crew were well looked after, really well looked after.
How do you look back at your time working with the Who?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. Um, I was heartbroken to leave, but it was because my boss's wife thought I was having an affair with him and I wasn't. And it was also at the time that the two bosses I had split their partnership, and one took the Who, that's Bill Kirbishley, and the other guy, Pete Rudge, who was living in New York, English guy, took the Stones and Lynyrd Skynyrd because he was managing Skynyrd. So suddenly Skynyrd didn't have a London office. So Pete asked me to run the London office for Skynyrd and then to go work with him on the Stones tour. Because I'd only done Who tours, so about probably 6 European Who tours and a few Skynyrd tours when they split. When was the split? 75 or 76, yeah. So then I opened an office for Skynyrd and the Stones.
Were you with Keith Moon the night before he died?
Yes, I was. We were at Tramp, the nightclub, which has now become infamous because of Prince Andrew.
What was Keith Moon like that night though?
Oh, the same as ever. We'd go regularly. We'd go a lot, probably 3 nights a week. We'd go there, and we just have fun. It was always he would hold court. People would come to him, and he was wonderful. He was so amusing. He was so witty. He was so clever with words. He was one of his dear close friends was Peter Cook. Do you
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
Peter Cook and Dudley Moore? Together, they were hilarious. And they were really, I'd call them wordsmiths. They were very good with words. And it's interesting that Keith was like that because I don't think he'd had a especially good education. He was just very sharp mentally, very witty and sharp. Yeah. He could cut you down. He could be nasty, but he never was to me, ever.
What,
I loved him. I adored him. And I'm still in touch with his girlfriend who was with him at that time, Annette. Yeah.
do you
And
think he
she
saw you
came,
as a bit of a mother figure, do you think?
yeah, definitely. What was the thing in America? They called, somebody called me, the Skinner lot, they called me their den mother. Now, den mother's like a sort of scout leader. So that's what they called me, their den mother. Yeah, much like a mother.
So you mentioned then you went to work with the Rolling Stones and Leonard Skinner. We'll start off with the Rolling Stones. What was that tour like when you first did?
God, hard work, really hard work, really hard work. Massive. Was one of the biggest tours that had been on the road at that time. I think it was the biggest tour. I think it had more trucks than any other tour. Luckily, I wasn't looking after the crew. The crew had their own because it was so big. And this was where Brian Croft looked after them. And they had their own plane and buses. So I was just with the band. But with the band party, there were probably 60 of us anyway, because there was all the band, all their girlfriends, some of their children, some of their wives, hangers on, a few groupies, a few drug dealers.
And the girlfriend's hard to deal with as well.
No, they were fine. You see, also by this time, I knew Bianca well, so she was on the road. And I got to know very well Bill Wyman's girlfriend, but she called herself Astrid Wyman. They were never married, but she was lovely. Charlie's wife, Shirley, was fantastic, really nice. And Woody's wife, Chrissy, she was lovely. Yeah, they were all really nice, very nice.
When we mentioned like you were like a teacher on a school trip, teachers often like approach kids differently. So if there's a naughty kid and a good kid, they'll treat them differently. Was you like that with the different band members?
I suppose I probably was. I mean, Charlie was always good, you see. Charlie would always do whatever you wanted him to do. Woody would disappear off. and I'd have to find him. And the same with Skynyrd. I mean, actually, none of them were good. I had to, yeah, I had to go to local bars and pubs to find them if they weren't at sound check or between sound check and the gig. Yeah, because they'd all, if we didn't go back to the hotel, they'd all wander off. And if they weren't back in time, I'd be traipsing around the area with roadies looking for these drunken guys with their long hair and the cowboy hats.
Do you think with the Stones it helps that you'd lived and worked with Mick Jagger?
Probably because they all knew me from being
Yeah.
the nanny. And I mean, they'd often say, "Oh, come on, nanny, let's go and have a cup of tea." So they all knew that I'd lived with Mick and Bianca and that I was, I suppose, a decent person, you know, to be trusted. I mean, I've never let any of the secrets out, and there are many, believe you me.
I can
I
imagine.
mean, no, I wouldn't do that. They've got children and grandchildren now. You know, you just don't do that kind of thing.
No, I understand. I totally understand.
Yeah. Yeah. I told as much as I could in my book.
With what was I, oh yeah, with the Rolling Stones, when you're living with Mick Jagger and you're seeing the Stones get together and everything that's going on, was you a bit reluctant to go on tour with them?
Um, no, no, because you see, by the time I did the Stones, I'd already been on the road with the Who and
Yeah.
Skynyrd a few times. So it was just another gig, really. It's just another band. And I remember when I was with my boss, Pete Rudge, in the house he was renting in London. It was quite late at night, and we were setting up the tour for the Stones. And he said, "Oh, I've got Mick on the phone. He wants to talk to you." And I said, "Hello, it's your old nanny here." And I said, "Do you mind me being your tour manager?" And he said, "No, it'll be great. We can talk about the kids." So that's how it was. So, and I no, I just it was just my job. It was what I did, and I was good at it.
So, with Lynyrd Skynyrd, that were your favourite band you worked with, wasn't it?
I absolutely, I, I don't think I never bought a Rolling Stones record. I think I bought a Who one when I was at school. I bought a Beach Boys one, and that was probably it. But my passion was always classical music. And when I was working with The Who, a boyfriend of mine at MCA Records gave me a whole pile of albums. And one of them, and I thought, oh, well, I won't play them, but one of them was Lynyrd Skynyrd's first album, pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. And I put it on and I loved it. I absolutely loved their music. I'd never loved the Stones. I'd never loved the Who. The Who, I like Barbara O'Reilly. That's probably the only song I like. Love. Stones, not interested in any of them. But Skynyrd just touched me really deeply. And that was why I got so close to them because they all knew that I genuinely loved their music. And I adored those guys. We became so close, so close. I mean, should have been on the plane when the plane crashed. I was
Yeah.
due to be on it. Yeah,
I was going to say, yeah, a phone call really saved your life, didn't it?
absolutely. From my fiance, Dean. Yeah. He'd phone me every night anyway, but we just got engaged. I'd been in the States for the wedding of Gary, the guitarist. And Dean and I got engaged at that time. And also Ronnie, the leader, had asked me to manage them. Their contract was up with the original manager in the November. I came back to England, it would have been September after Gary's wedding, having got engaged to Dean and planning to manage Skynyrd. And Dean phoned me every night. And one night he said, "Change your flight." I was due to fly out on the Wednesday. He said, "Change it. We're getting a new plane. This plane's falling to pieces. Flames are coming out of one of the engines," because it was a prop engine plane. And so I changed my flight from the Wednesday to the Saturday. And they were due to play Madison Square Garden the following week in New York. And the plane crashed on the Thursday night. their last flight on that plane. And I would have been sitting with Dean and Ronnie, who were killed in the plane crash. Yeah. So suddenly my fiance had gone and my whole career had gone, my whole future. What is that cliche they say? God does something while you're busy making plans or something, you know. You just never know. Things can turn on a sixpence. You
Yeah,
never
it's
know what's
crazy.
going to happen.
How did you find out?
I had a phone call, middle of the night, in my flat in London, from another tour manager, English tour manager, was on the road in the States. And he phoned me and he said, I've just heard on the radio that Lynyrd Skynyrd have had a plane crash. He said, that's all I know. Don't know anything else. Don't know where, who's alive, who's dead, don't know anything. And so I immediately started phoning Dean's parents. Engaged. I couldn't get through. After probably about 2 hours, I just didn't know what had happened. You know, I knew nothing. I got through, to his father, and he just said, we've lost him. And that was how I found out. And the next day in London, it was astonishing. Front page of the Evening Standard, big picture of Skynyrd. They got to be that big. They just reached the pinnacle. So tragic. And it's amazing that their music is still so loved. I mean, I'm not surprised because it really is the most wonderful music.
Do you think that they're gone on to be massive?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they just climbed up there, you know, and then crash. And I stayed in touch with the survivors. Mind you, I flew out on the Saturday anyway, but not for my engagement party and not for any celebrations, but for their funerals. You know, and I visited the other survivors in the hospital, went to the funerals. It was very hard. And then the survivors asked me to manage them 2 years later. This was Rossington Collins band. Gary Rossington and Alan Collins, they got together. But that was very difficult. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the same without Ronnie Van Zant, who was really their leader, strong in mind and body, my absolute hero. I worshipped that man. And he worshipped me. We were so close. We never had an affair, nothing like that. We were just really close. And when they asked me, the survivors asked me to go and manage them, I was like, oh, yes. But it wasn't the same. And also, Alan was just messed up mentally. He was taking too many drugs. He'd never been the sanest of people. He'd always been slightly scatty, well, no, very scatty, but in a nice, fun way. Suddenly it turned mean as often. And I think he'd had some brain damage in the crash. I mean, they were terribly badly hurt. Gary had so many broken bones and Leon. But, you know, I just wanted to be with him. I survived. I stayed as long as I could, but I couldn't put up with it. I really couldn't deal with it. And the thing that was the last straw was one night Alan got a rifle out. He was completely stoned and drunk, and he started aiming at one of the roadies, the Stoned Roadie, who does the Stoned Roadie YouTube channel.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was aiming at Craig, and the only reason he missed is because he was so stoned. So I was out of there the next day. I just left. And Craig and I talk about that in our interview.
It's no surprise it had like a mental effect on them, but like you said, it's
Exactly.
got too much for you. Like,
Absolutely, absolutely. We were all still too heartbroken as well. You know, we'd lost, and Dean was their best friend. Ronnie was their leader. And Steve, the new guitarist, and his sister both died. And they were so sweet and lovely. Yeah. And the two pilots died, who, of course, I didn't know. But
what was your favourite memory of Lynyrd Skynyrd then when you'd worked for them?
staying at Ronnie Van Zant's house in Florida, in Jacksonville, well, just outside Jacksonville, they all, once they got a bit of money, they all bought lovely houses, ranch houses with horses and things, on the St. John's River, the St. John's River. And I was staying with Ronnie and Judy, and they just had their baby, Melody. She was about 6 months old. And suddenly there was an alligator in the swimming pool. Terrified the life out of me. I've never seen anything like it. That is a vivid memory. And Ronnie just went out there with his rifle. He didn't shoot it, but he just made a noise, scared it, and it ran off, clambered out the pool, ran away back into the river.
You won't get anything like that over here, would you?
No, no.
You mentioned you like Lynyrd Skynyrd were your favourite band musically as well. Could you enjoy the gigs when you were working?
Oh, I loved them. Yes. I would always stand at the side of the stage. Oh, I'd also walk around the auditorium because then afterwards they'd ask me, especially the girl singers, were we in tune? Could you hear us properly? That kind of thing. And so I'd always give them feedback. They were the only band I would listen to. The other bands, I'd usually be tidying up the dressing rooms or sitting in the loo reading a book or something like that. It was my only peace and quiet when they were actually on stage. So that's I would hide with the Stones and the Who. But with Skinner, no, I was always, and standing on the side of the stage was heaven, heaven.
Is there a favourite gig or moment from a gig that stands out?
No, again, they all blend into one, really. They were all, I mean, I just visualize standing next to Billy's piano and watching him, Billy Powell. What a brilliant pianist he was. He was just a genius. He'd been classically trained and he was really good. And actually, when I was with The Who, sometimes I would stand on the side of the stage, and especially during Barbara O'Reilly, when Roger would go, Sally, take my hand. And he'd hold his hand out to me. So I was often there for that. Yeah.
Was
Sally,
it?
take my hand.
I'm sure you saw firsthand as well. Then, like the chaos of the Who on stage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, but it was the same as Skinner. I mean, especially with Pete Townsend breaking his guitars and Keith Moon kicking over the drums. Artemis would often kick over the drums as well. Do you know Artemis is the only one still alive?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
only one. Yeah, yeah. I'm still in touch. Yeah.
What's he like? Is he all right? Is
Mad as a hatter.
it?
Lovely, but mad as a hatter. Yeah.
What? How do you look back on your days on the road then, just with fond memories?
Oh, very fond memories. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. But I stopped doing it when I got married, really because my husband didn't want me to be off for months at a time. And that's when I then really got into putting on big charity events.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, I helped the Comic Relief people, which became Comic Relief. It was charity projects then. And I produced and stage managed the first 4 events for them.
So how did you get into the charity side of things?
Well, I'd always done charity work as a child. My parents were very involved with helping charities because I had a sister who was, I have to be careful with the wording. It's different wording now. She was mentally handicapped. I think you call her neurodivergent now. And so we'd always helped charities that looked after people like that. And because she went to what was called a sort of special school. And she was a sweetheart. And so I'd always it was in my DNA. And my grandparents, my very wealthy, both sets of grandparents, always did sort of big fetes for charity in their gardens. So it was kind of just in me to help. And the boyfriend I'd met on the Mike Oldfield tour, a guy called Nico, the guitarist, first person I fell in love with after Dean died. Nico introduced me to a friend of his called Jane Tewson, and it was Jane who set up Comic Relief. And we met and she asked me, would I come and do these events? I said, yeah, of course I will. So I did them all completely free, no expenses, nothing. And Jane had set it up in such a way that all the money we raised went to the charitable work. And her salary and her assistant and their office, those were funded by people like Richard Branson, the Saatchis. So and that's the way that Pete Townsend set up his charity, which I then went on to help with. Because again, all the money I raised would go to the charity and all my costs, my salary, my assistant, my office, Pete Townsend paid for. So, and you see, now I read so much about these chief executives of charities like Comic Relief earning like 150,000. It's shocking to me. It really is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But it's interesting about Comic Relief because so many people think that Richard Curtis set it up with Lenny Henry. No, they didn't set it up. This wonderful woman, Jane Tewson, set it up. And the only reason she's sort of gone out of the public eye is because she moved to Australia. She's not around to do the interviews. But people have this misunderstanding. Well, Richard Curtis does very well, and so did Lenny Henry. So, yeah.
I'm sure you're proud of your days in the music business, but are you also like really proud of the work you did for charity?
Very, because also what was so wonderful was when I did the very first big event for Comic Relief. It's in my book. It was called the International Netherwallop Arts Festival. I got the road crew from rock and roll. I got the sound people. I got the people to come and build a stage. I got all the equipment from rock and roll. They all did it for nothing. And those same companies are still helping Comic Relief. And that's how it all started way back in the early 80s. Yeah. So I'm very proud of having sort of introduced everybody to so we could help the charities carry on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's brilliant work that you've done, and like you say, it was like you wasn't rewarded with financially from it, so it's great that how you've done it.
I was earning good money by touring, you see. My job paid me well, so I didn't need to take money from the charity events. I just said to them, don't worry, I'll do it. So I had to travel for miles, especially the Nether Wallop one, driving all the way down from London to Hampshire nearly every day to go and sort it out for months. But I never claimed a penny. Well, I didn't need to.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's mentioned in your book. I don't mind mentioning, but you had a bit of a health scare. How are you doing now?
Oh, thank you. No, I'm fine. Yeah, I had cancer. It's in 1999. It was a long time ago now. Yeah, I had breast cancer. It's very common now. But again, I think I was a pioneer. I was the first woman to have a tattoo put on a mastectomy scar. So I had a tattoo. There were loads of newspaper articles and magazine articles about, and you've seen it in the book anyway, the picture of it. Yeah. And so I'm proud of that because um, the person who took the photographs was my sister-in-law, who had also had a mastectomy. And she's the one who took the photos of me. And between us, we had hundreds of emails from women all around the world saying, thank you. Thank you for showing us that we don't need to be ashamed. We can be proud of our scars. Yeah, so that helped people as well.
It's crazy, really, because all your life you've helped people really in different
I know,
ways, haven't
yes, I know, yes.
you?
I seem to have, but I've been very blessed. I've been able to do that, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
been in a good position.
what's life like for you these days? What are you up to these days?
It's bliss. I love being retired. I don't know how I ever had the time to work. I love reading, so I'm catching up on all the books I wanted to read. I love going out to the cinema in the daytime. Makes me feel very decadent. Makes me feel like I'm skiving off work or something. I meet up with friends. See, I live in South Devon near what's called Dartington. Dartington is very famous. It was a school way back in the sort of 1920s, but very creative for artists and actors. And it's just, I can see it from my window here. It's just up the road. And it's got the most amazing grounds for walking in. It's got the most amazing restaurant and cafe. It's got the most amazing cinema in the old Tithe Barn. And I go regularly to that cinema. So, and then I'm near Top Ness as well, which is what I always call the hippy dippy town. And they've got another funky cinema there, the Top Ness Cinema, and they show really unusual films. The ones I miss from London, the sort of the blockbusters you'd have to go into Plymouth or Exeter. But here at these little cinemas, they're the ones that show the sort of foreign films, the French
Yeah,
film
yeah.
and the more intellectual films. And it's bliss. I love being retired. And I'm really glad I finished the book. That was hard work.
How long did it take you to write that?
Well, I was mulling it over for about 10 years. And I'd kept all my old notebooks and all my old diaries. That's why I had the information, because my memory's not so good, but I had it all written down. And not diaries with thoughts or feelings, but diaries with appointments. So I knew when I'd sort of had lunch with Eric Clapton and his wife, that kind of thing. And, lunch with Eric and Patty. And so I kind of had it all, and I thought, I've got to get rid of all this stuff, but it's historical. It might be interesting to people. But it was great big trunks full of books, diaries, big work diaries, and big notepads filled. I went through all of them, and I got rid of them now, which is great. And so all in all, it probably took me about 10 years. But the actual writing took about 2, and actual sort of pulling it together. And then it took me about another year to sort out the publishing. And then the final bit was the sort of editing and proofreading. That's the hardest. And there are still mistakes in it that I thought I'd got, but you can't. I mean, there's one silly mistake that I must mention here out loud. On the Mike Oldfield story, I talk about the bell. We had the bell made, the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
bill of bells, big bell. And I said in the book that it was 8.5 tons. It wasn't tons, it was 8.5 stone. So, things like that. I just don't know where I got tons from. So that was a mistake. And also there's a couple of other little ones that other people wouldn't really notice.
Was
One of
it
the roadies contacted me and said, "You've got it wrong."
was it hard to write it, or was it no? Like, there's a lot of sad moments in there.
Yeah, when I got to the plane crash with Lynyrd Skynyrd, I remember saying to a friend, "This is really hard now." I was in tears nearly every day for about 2 weeks. And another thing, after the plane crash, I really couldn't listen to their music. I would just cry too much. I can listen to it now, it's been a long time. But for a long time, if it came on the radio, I'd have to turn it off because I couldn't drive and sob. So
Oh,
it really affected me writing the book. But it's like a cliche, but it's quite cathartic. You
yeah.
get it out. Yeah, yeah.
How do you deal with something like that? Like
You
something.
just have to work through it, I think. You just have to cry through it. It's part of life. We all have tragedies in our lives. People die. It's normal. It's not normal to die so young, but you just have to get on. It's one step after another. You've just got to put one foot in front of the other, and do your best. That's all you can do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, to finish off, what's one memory that is your favourite of your life, or on the road, or charity work, or anything you've done?
What you see, my favorite memory was the time Dean and I decided to get married.
Is that the one that sticks out?
Yeah. And the first person we told was Ronnie Van Zant, the leader of Skynyrd. And he was like, his 2 favorite people in the whole world were going to get married. That to me is my everlasting happy memory. All the road stuff was just it just really does blend into one. I can't differentiate from one gig to another or one hotel to another. It's all a mishmash because it was many years of 4 or 5 bands of different things. So that's why I wrote the book, really, was to tell people the stories.
Yeah, well, I've got the book here, Rock and Roll Nanny.
Yeah, and you
It
can get it on my website, rockandrollnanny.co.uk, Amazon, and you can order it from bookshops.
I'll leave a link in the description if anybody wants to check it out.
Oh, thank you.
Uh,
Yes, lovely.
Is there a specific link you'd like me to leave? Do you want me to leave the link to your
To
website?
my website, because there's lots of extra photos on the website of all the bands.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and all the, backstage and at their homes and that kind of thing. Yes. Have you looked at the website yet?
Yeah, I checked it out. Yeah,
You
it's
did. Yeah.
well laid
Yeah.
out. That's how I contacted you, I think.
That's right. That's how
Right.
you did. Yes, exactly. So
So,
that's the best place to look. And then there's the 2 YouTube films Well, first of all, there's the Stoned Roadie, and then there's Rock and Roll Nanny interview with, sorry, I'm looking at my notes, interview with tour manager Sally Arnold. And then there's another one, but I can't remember the.
Oh, I have Legends of Rock.
That's it. Well
Yeah,
done. Thank
yeah, yeah.
you. Yes, yes. So I've done those. I've done 3 YouTubes, and now you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the time you've given me.
Thank you, Ethan. And isn't it funny that we're both Arnold?
I know it's strange that could be the lost relatives.
I bet we are related in the dim, distant past.
It's strange, isn't it? Yeah,
It's like I told you, my grandfather, Father Arnold, he had 10 brothers. So there's thousands of Arnolds out there.
I guess it's not really a common name either, is it, Arnold? You don't hear a lot of Arnold,
No,
really.
you don't. No. So we are related, I'm sure. So it's lovely to meet you and speak to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. And it was
Okay.
it was brilliant to speak to you and hear about your life and your fascinating stories.
Jolly good. Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you.